Hi, everybody. Welcome to CBI. We're putting on a great webinar for you today. It's perfect for this time of year. You are going to have some time well spent today. My name's Sam Laprade. I have the absolute honor of hosting these webinars for a couple of years now. So thank you so much for joining us. We're getting participants joining us now. So it's great to have all of you here. I love when we start off our time together, and let me know where you're coming from all across the country. We've had people, of course, all over the world as well, which is always, I love seeing that. So feel free to throw in the chat and tell me where you're joining from today. I'm coming from Ottawa today, snowy Ottawa. So it's great to be here today with everyone. We have a really interesting discussion for you today, and I can't wait. You're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions, and Amanda will answer them a little bit later too. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm hoping that you get lots out of today as well. Joining from Winnipeg, hello, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining from Winnipeg. I guess I can't complain about the snow if my friend from Winnipeg is here. I wanted to take this time to introduce Nicholas. Nicholas is with the Capacity Building Institute. How are you, Nick?
Good. How are you, Sam?
Excellent. Looking very official. I'm going to turn it over to Nick. He's going to tell you all about CBI. I'll be back in a minute and introduce our great guest today, Amanda Rocheleau. Stay with us, everyone.
Thanks, Sam. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Nicholas Kuchme, and I am the Sustainable Development Engagement Intern at CBI. Now, I'm sure we're all very eager to hear Sam and Amanda talk, so I'll get started. CBI is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing training, coaching, and mentorship support to staff and volunteers in the environmental nonprofit sector across Canada. We are a member of Sustainable Capacity Solutions collection of 5 nonprofits who are each committed to addressing unique capacity building needs of these small ENGOs. Now, CBI's mission in particular is to provide equal opportunity and access to capacity building training for every small shop nonprofit environmental leader across Canada. This comes in the form of essential training and coaching for these leaders through expert courses and programs catered to various positions and responsibilities in the nonprofit sector. Now, we focus on 6 core areas to build capacity. The goal is to equip them with the skills needed to lead their organizations effectively and make a lasting impact. Now, CBI facilitates a number of programs like these webinars, but that's not all we do. Our intern training program is designed to support youth who are starting their careers in the environmental nonprofit sector. Our capacity building certificate program is a boot camp for executives and senior managers. Registration for the next cohort of the Capacity Building Certificate program will begin in the new year. And finally, we're bringing seasoned leaders together with environmental nonprofits in the Ottawa area. You can learn more and sign up at capacitybuilding.ca/engaging leaders, or contact us if you're interested. We'd love to match someone with over 20 years of experience to a nonprofit who needs their passion. You'll join a board for a 1-year term at a local ENGO, get board training and resources, and facilitate a workshop like this webinar. Hurry up and register ASAP. Our registration will close soon. Now, to make sure you're getting the best of the best, we have a team of amazing lead trainers: Sam Laprade, Rob Barnes, Barb King, and Alex Keenan. And of course, our very own Sam is hosting today. I would also like to thank all our sponsors and funders: the Ottawa Community Foundation, the Sustainable Capacity Foundation, and the City of Ottawa. Without their support, none of these programs would be possible. Now, as a reminder, we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or insights you might have, or if you just want to learn more about CBI and its programs. As I said before, we're looking for both people and organizations to participate in our new season leadership program. So contact us through email, phone, or through our website. Now, our next webinar will be on Wednesday, January 24th, 2024, from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Now, that's a Wednesday, which will be a little bit different if you're used to the Monday times. But be sure to sign up to our newsletter to get all the details on this next webinar and more from the Capacity Building Institute. Now, thank you all for being here, and I will pass it back to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Nick. Appreciate everything that you do for us here at CBI. I am very much looking forward to our next year as well. 2024 is coming quick. Seeing where everybody's coming in, everything from Lloydminster right through to Windsor, Ontario. Everybody's here today. Saskatoon as well. It's lovely to see everybody joining, people commenting if they have snow or not. So that's always you're in Canada when. I wanted to introduce a dear friend of mine by the name of Amanda Rocheleau. Hello, Amanda.
Hello.
Hello. Amanda and I worked together, let's call it a decade ago, just so we can both kind of live with ourselves. And
I've
we're going
lost
to
track
talk
of time anyway.
there we go. We're going to talk about a very important subject today. But Amanda, I would like you to talk a little bit about sort of your career journey and what you're doing now. Take us back a little bit.
Sure. Career journey. I have essentially been in the field of social work for 20 years now. I was thinking about I don't know, can't recall exactly when we met along the journey, but I mean, my first job, I was probably 20 years old, doing some pretty intense work. So, yeah, I mean, I did my bachelor's of social work at Carleton University, jumped right into the field, spent about a decade working with, in the nonprofit sector, working with individuals with concurrent disorders, so mental health issues as well as addiction issues, usually experiencing or at risk of experiencing some level of homelessness. And I had other jobs along the way. Worked kind of ventured into more clinical work, providing counseling and therapy for individuals. And then again, can't track time anymore, it seems, but about 10 years ago or so, I really shifted my focus into supporting helping professionals specifically. I kind of had this aha moment, very much stemmed from my own personal experience, where I was feeling very, very burnt out, questioning, how does one survive in the nonprofit sector, raise family, and keep their sanity in the process? And so in my own healing journey and kind of the research I was doing and try to figure out the answers to those questions, I just thought somebody needs to be talking about this more. We need to crack open this conversation. And so about 10 years ago, when I started to do presentations on compassion fatigue and wellness as helping professionals, most of the time, I mean, other than the fact that everybody knew what burnout was, a lot of the other topics like compassion fatigue or the concepts of secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma were very, very new to people. And so I did a lot of education in the community about that. And nowadays, most of the time, my audiences know these concepts. That there's been this tremendous shift in, cracking up that conversation about our psychological health. So I've been doing this for about 10 years or so, and I'm very, very grateful that for about the last 6 or 7, I've been able to do it full time. I have a private practice that, again, provides therapy and support specifically for helping professionals. I knew that there needed to be a space in our community where helpers could go, where they felt like they could receive specific and confidential services. For their mental health. That, I remember getting numbers for counselors, and I was like, I know those numbers. I tell clients about those numbers all the time. Yeah. I can't go there. I could be sitting in the waiting room with my clients, right? And so, yeah, I've been doing this full time, and I'm really, really happy to be doing it. It's amazing work.
That's wonderful, Amanda. Thank you so much for sharing. And you know, in terms of cracking open the conversation on compassion fatigue, let's start with the obvious, and a question that I probably asked you a decade ago. What is compassion fatigue?
What is it?
Do I have it? Was my second question. Yeah.
There isn't really a great definition of compassion fatigue, to be honest. Depending on the book you crack open or the article you're reading, it's going to probably define it a little bit differently, which is unfortunate because what we can't define well and clearly, we can't research. And so we've got a long ways to go with that. But here is my best crack at it. So essentially, compassion fatigue is the experience that people can have who find themselves in a role where they're supporting other people frequently. That could be work. That could be you as a caregiver. That could be you as a parent. That could be you as a social advocate or a conscientious, global citizen. When you extend yourself in this empathetic way, there is a stress that you can experience from that. And if that happens frequently over time, there can be this gradual erosion for our empathetic response. We can feel less sensitive over time to the suffering of other people, less responsive. It's interesting because now the terminology does seem to be shifting maybe away from the idea of compassion fatigue and more towards terms like empathy-based stress or empathic strain, or I'm starting to hear empathy burnout. And one of the reasons why there's this shift that's happening is because, one, we're just trying to get more clear about what the experience is. And really, and this is the way I often think about it. The act of compassion is never exhausting. Compassion is empathy in action. It's the action we take to relieve the suffering of other people. And most of the time that's the reviving, rejuvenating, awesome part. I mean, for a lot of people on this call or who'll be tuning in, you can think about how that's our ultimate desire. We want to help relieve the suffering of others. We want to make change. So much of our job isn't that, though. Those moments where you're like, yes, that was a win. Yes, I feel really good about that. Those are actually kind of sporadic. And it's all this time in between where we're empathizing with people, experiencing the stress of trying to relieve their suffering and not being successful. That's what empathy-based stress actually is. That's what essentially compassion fatigue is. And so we're moving away from the idea that it's that we stop being compassionate, because we don't stop being compassionate. It's that there's all this other stress internally and externally getting in the way of us being able to just be compassionate people, right? So that's what it kind of is. I mean, I think it's easier to explain it in the experience, and it's just that feeling that you have where you're just like, enough. I can't. My heart aches for all the suffering that is in the world that I can't do anything about.
And it's so interesting because I was close to a decade at the Ottawa mission. I wasn't frontline. I was in the fundraising department. But it's certainly, you certainly saw, and I certainly experienced it too, just that being in that environment every day.
Yeah.
Whether you're at an organization like in social services, or you're dealing with a huge issue like climate change. I mean, it can really be daunting to think. It can be frustrating for people too. And I'm sure it's daunting. So I don't think it really, and once again, you're the expert, but help me a little bit, because you mentioned, being a parent, and you mentioned, all the other things going on in the world, and with everything else going on in the world, this on top of it, it can be something that people are experiencing in many different ways.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes, and this is what I love about the work that I do, is that oftentimes the concept of compassion fatigue or empathy-based stress is kind of reserved for people who are sort of on the front lines or doing kind of human service work or animal care, because holy moly, I did not realize that I was going to become like Ottawa's therapist for veterinarians, because
Mhm.
the compassion fatigue is quite real there as well. But no, I mean, part of me gets tired of kind of going back to the pandemic, but it's such a significant part of our history and still our current lives. And if the pandemic wasn't a wake-up call for everybody, that this idea of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, you know, sort of this impact of constant exposure altering our point of view on things, or our sense of safety, or the sense of the world, you know, everybody is susceptible to this experience. And so it is certainly not reserved for individuals who are doing that, you know, kind of frontline human service work. If you happen to be an individual that, again, is kind of open-minded, open-hearted, you know, a good listener, a good friend, empathetic by nature, maybe highly sensitive. There's also some other personality traits, like if you happen to be a people pleaser or an overachiever, you know, I always kind of go overachiever, people pleaser, and recovery over here. Like, I definitely recognize that it wasn't just my work that contributed to my experience of compassion fatigue, but it was me being me. And I needed to do a lot of work around kind of changing my mindset and therefore my relationships, in order to fully recover from the experience of compassion fatigue. And even then it comes back in flare-ups, right? You have those moments still where it becomes overwhelming. And the way I always kind of phrase it is sort of think about, that's always the first aspect of compassion fatigue is like you get flooded, you know, and your empathy is like on hyper overdrive. And then what a compassion fatigue essentially is kind of like, call it like aspects of your nervous system, your mind, your heart, your spirit, whatever, kind of goes, I can't take it anymore. I can't take this heartache. And it numbs your self-awareness. It numbs your empathy so that you can keep functioning, you know, without hurting. And so it's like we go through a lot of the motions. It's why compassion fatigue is quite invisible to a lot of people in a lot of ways, because you still do your job, still put a smile on your face. I still feed the kids. I still, answer the phone to my friend who's, going through a difficult time. But internally, I'm going, I just can't, and this is enough. And you're only half present, and you're less responsive, less empathetic in those moments. It's such a human experience.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, I'm sensing it on a spectrum. So, because a lot of times it takes an emergency for me to go, I actually need some help, right? Yeah. So the spectrum, I'm like, I'm kind of feeling this way. I think a lot of people are like this, especially, people that are busy. I guess everyone's busy, but I think people that, try to be that people pleaser, or you're trying to take care of, a big issue or something that's daunting. Yeah. It's, you can kind of go right up to maybe 100 kilometers. You get to 100 kilometers and then you just put up your hand.
Yeah.
What can we do at 20, 40, 60 before it gets to the point where we're just like, I'm out?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to acknowledge that, like, that's such a common experience. And, sometimes I refer to that as comparative suffering. Comparative suffering is the idea that we look at our pain, or we look at our own struggle, and then we compare it to somebody who has it so much worse than us. And then we minimize what's going on with us, because we think, well, at least I have a job. Well, at least I have a house, or at least I have all these things that are stressing me out, Yeah. And so it's such a common practice for us to minimize our stress. And so I'm a big fan of Kristen Neff. She is the founder of Mindful Self-Compassion Institute in the States. Her website is selfcompassion.org. I don't know if she says this, or if she just, like, if it's her quote, or if she just says it all the time, but she says, not all suffering is the same. We are not all in the same boat, but all suffering is worthy of compassion. So first and foremost, the things that I focus on in both my presentations and workshops, as well as individually, is that the building blocks to, kind of intervening with ourselves on that continuum is self-awareness and self-compassion. One is we have to stop and pay attention. We have to know what our warning signs are. And, like you said, I call it like green zone, yellow zone, red zone, so like that continuum of like green zone is like, there's still stressors, but I'm not feeling the stress as much. I can kind of complete that stress cycle. I have more of a, I can do this attitude. I got this. Oh, this, this is hard, but I can still, I'm like, my empathy is still with me. I'm not feeling overwhelmed. Yellow zone is like the irritability is creeping up. Like everybody has their own warning signs. So, again, listeners can be, thinking right now, well, maybe get down a piece of paper and be like, what would I notice? I always like pay attention, like what happens in your body, has your thoughts change, and how do your behaviors change? So for me, I get a lot of tension in my jaw. And I think that's because when you have that experience where you're like faking it, you know what I mean? You're like, you're taking in all this information from the world. And then it's just like, I'm like swallowing it down. And it's like, I get this tension and this tightness, and I have to pay attention to that. That's a big warning sign. Although I would probably say that most of the time when it gets to that physical point, it's probably been building for a while. Yeah. And again, like I just haven't been wanting to acknowledge it or something like that, And we all know our red zone warning signs. Like you said, that's usually when we have the wake up call and we need to put the brake on, or we need to ask for help. But the idea is to really back the train up a little bit and figure out those warning signs earlier. And if we're going to do that self-awareness work, you've got to be compassionate towards yourself, because most of us, when we tune in, we just get all judgy that we're not handling things well, or that we should be more compassionate, or we should be this or that. And then we're adding more to that empathy-based stress. We're adding more to the pressure. So yeah, self-awareness, self-compassion, I think, are those pieces are important.
And I love that Hannah chose this time of year to do this, because when she said, here's what I'm thinking about for December, I'm like, yes, Hannah, because I think about because I work with all these lovely people who work in nonprofit, whether it be for the environment or any other type of nonprofit. And everybody is looking towards December 31st, Giving Tuesday's behind us. We have 28 days to raise as much money as we can in this calendar year. And the tank can feel kind of empty. Yeah. The tank can feel like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, a donor calling and, just upset about something. It can kind of feel a bit overwhelming. And even when people are trying to help, sometimes you're just like, I just don't even want their help.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but that's how Absolutely. I feel sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that actually at the thick of my burnout, we're talking like 10 years ago. One of the things that I noticed was I had zero holiday spirit. Everybody was like, it's so generous and everybody's giving in the joy. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's exhausting, depleting. People are hurting. You're celebrating under your Christmas tree. Like, you know what? There are people with no Christmas trees there, and people were calling me like Scrooge. And I couldn't find, everything that I was acknowledging was true, but it wasn't in harmony or balanced with all of that hope and that joy and that drive, the things that got me into working in the nonprofit sector in the first place. And so that's the hard thing is that it's like when you start noticing that tipping happen into the negativity, those are signs of experiencing compassion fatigue. And as you said earlier, it really is on a continuum, because you can have moments like that. You can have a day or two, and then you can kind of bounce back and that harmony comes back. hope, that, drive, that empathy. But then there are times where you kind of get stuck in it. And if people aren't careful, you get stuck in it so long that you wake up 10 years later, you look at yourself and you're like, how did I become this cynical, jaded, negative person that no longer has a sense of purpose and why I do what I do, and I've worked with people on all parts of that continuum.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I think too, when we see things in others, like sometimes, there'll be somebody and I'll be like, I feel like, they need a day, or they need some time. How do we ever have the conversation with someone to even share the term compassion fatigue? Because for me, and I think you might remember this, when you even shared that term with me, I'm like, there's a name for it. Like, I'm not by myself. So it was kind of like, I was like, I'm not the only one, because I did feel like I was very alone in that.
Yeah.
So I think sharing even the fact that it exists with someone else, that's why I'm so happy we're doing this today.
Yeah.
But that might be just enough to get someone to research it on their own, or seek help for themselves.
Absolutely. I think the more open we are about the concept and talking about burnout too, because they really start to overlap. One of the three, there are kind of three telltale signs of burnout. One is the obvious, the exhaustion, right? You just don't have enough energy. But the second part is that mental distancing. It's kind of that dissociating, it's pulling back, and that cynicism and that negativity creeping forward. And so as people sort of disengage, as a sign of burnout, that can kind of be a sign of compassion fatigue, and kind of overlap with compassion fatigue as well. Just so, since I mentioned three, I'll mention the last one too, which actually I think connects a lot with compassion fatigue as well. And that's that the third sign of burnout is when we have a really reduced sense of efficacy. And again, I think that connects to that experience of like what leads to compassion fatigue, is because we feel less confident, less capable of making that difference or having that impact that we perhaps, were striving for at the beginning of our careers or earlier on. And so coming back to your question, it's really interesting one. How do we kind of signal to somebody that we think that maybe they are struggling with something? And first I say, and maybe we all know this, but it's still worth saying out loud. It's probably not really helpful to go up to somebody, kind of point the finger and say, I think you're burnt out.
Yeah.
You really, what's happened to you?
No.
So let's not do that.
No.
But my favorite way of approaching those conversations, because I am the compassion fatigue expert, and then so it's like kind of my radar is on, and then I see it, and it's like, how do I say something without coming in like they're unwanted therapist,
Yeah.
And so my strategy is always just personal disclosure. It's just, let's bring the common humanity to the table and say, I've noticed that I have been feeling compassion fatigue at times. I have had times in the past where I've experienced compassion fatigue, especially at this time of year. Everybody kind of has a front. It's, it's all like hype, but like underneath there's a bit of sadness, or there's a bit of pulling away. There's a little bit of numbing that's happening. And just through, obviously to the level of your own comfort, but telling your own story, or you can say in general, I've been noticing, kind of this kind of lower affect, sort of this disengagement that's happening around the office, or underneath all of our elf hats and joy, can we talk about some real experiences that could be there too? I think that and it's just, it's an invitation, and everybody has different levels of comfort around being vulnerable and being open, and they may not open up to you, but you may have planted the seed. And they may go home and Google it.
Exactly.
Right? Or talk
Yeah.
to their therapist about it, or come back weeks later and say, hey, remember when you mentioned that word compassion fatigue? What were you talking about? Where did you hear about that? Because it got me thinking, you got to plant the seed, I think. But I have found the most helpful thing is just bringing the common humanity, normalizing it.
Yeah, normalizing it is huge. And I love leaving everyone with resources. That's always been a big part for me. Where are you sending us? When you mentioned Googling it, I always get a little bit nervous about that, just because I want to make sure we're going to the right spots.
Yeah.
Are there books written on this now? You obviously you've got a great practice as well. Where are you sending everyone?
Well, I will say that my website, amandarocheleau.com, is a pretty good resource. I have taken a lot of the information that is available, a lot of the assessment tools, which assessments are really great starting places, because you might be like, how much can I relate to this? Some people might be thinking, no, that's not me. And then you might do an assessment and be like, oh, I'm not in the red zone, but there's some signs there. And it gets you thinking. The other thing about assessments is you could be like, I'm feeling really good. Why? Do an assessment and it'll kind of give you information about, what you're doing well, or what what the green zone is now. So if that changes, then that's something that can alert you. So wherever you are on that continuum, do those assessments. So I've taken all the free ones available on the internet, pulled them together in kind of a little bit of a library. That's on my website in the free resource page. There's also a lot of different worksheets there to build up that self-awareness, journaling prompts and questions, some information worksheets is there. I have my book recommendations on my website as well. Really love this one, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by the Nagoski sisters, written for women. It's got a feminist angle on it, actually talks about the influence of the patriarchy and how women experience more burnout than men, because we're kind of cultured and sort of we learn to be givers from a very young age. Very interesting book, also very practical. Some really good tips and guides. If you are too exhausted to read, because it is that time of year, they also, if you guys are familiar with Brene Brown, Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us, she did an interview with these sisters, and the podcast episode is just really great. Good summary of the book, so if you got an hour to listen to a podcast and not, 5 to read the book, then that's great. And that link to that podcast is on my website too, in the audio section. So really try to pull stuff together. Let me see. So for the people pleasers, When It's Never About You, Irene Cohen, great read for the people pleasers. The People Pleaser's Guide to Reclaiming Your Health, Happiness, and Personal Freedom. So it doesn't speak about compassion fatigue directly, but I think if the root of somebody's compassion fatigue happens to be a lot of their overgiving, not recognizing those boundaries, or if you can relate to, for example, feeling uncomfortable about saying no. If you can relate to that, this might be a good book.
Someone said to me once, Sam, no is a complete sentence.
I love that.
And I was like, what? It is?
I know.
I had no idea. Yeah.
I'll make a couple of, like I said, lots of other recommendations, but the trauma stewardship maybe sounds a little bit intense because it's got the big T word in it. But this is a really great guide for people who are in all sorts of helping professionals. The author, Laura Van Lipsky, provides so many different profiles in here, people in all sorts of different roles, and their experiences of being helpers. And again, very great practical guides, really easy read. And you're going to read this book and really feel like you walk away with some things to work with, to make changes. And then her second book is called The Age of Overwhelm. And this is it's for anybody who's alive and paying attention in 2023, to a world that, is just really overwhelming when you really think about like our empathy was kind of biologically programmed in us through evolution to build relationships and to procreate. And, like that was the idea here, was for survival, protection, build relationships. And it wasn't really, our empathy wasn't really programmed to like take in the massive amount of world issues that we have, as you mentioned, when we're talking about environmental issues, climate change. If you're, have ears and eyes, you're on your phone, you use the internet, you listen to the radio, you're being exposed to, stories of struggle all the time, and that activates your empathy. And then we freeze, because it's not a person right in front of us that we're empathizing with. We're empathizing with things that are completely out of our reach and too big. And so it causes stress, and it alerts our nervous system to essentially go into survival mode. And so I think all of these books speak to that type of that experience, and how to recover from it from different angles. Yeah.
So, similar to exercise, where, I can't go to I'd love to, but I can't go to the gym tonight, work out for an hour and never have to do it again.
Yeah.
So, when we think about mental health, we often think about it sort of in that same exercise routine, that it's something we need to do on an ongoing basis. Yeah. I would assume that if you're going to be in this sector, nonprofit or, climate change environmentalist, is that you probably, if you get all, some great tips or read some books and maybe see a therapist, that it can be cyclical, that you might notice the warning signs a bit earlier, but it certainly can kind of emerge again. Am I right there?
Totally. It is. I mean, there's this great quote that I'm gonna kind of butcher it, but it's the idea that if we're going to be exposed to people suffering, that and not have an emotional reaction to it, it would be as absurd as going in the water and not getting wet. So I rarely talk about prevention. I talk about management. And there is a saying that goes, treat your mental health like dental health. And so you were talking about the exercise, it's the same idea, right? So I often ask my clients, does it make sense to not brush your teeth all week and then brush your teeth for 2 hours on Sunday? Like, is your dentist going to be happy with you? Is that going to give you the outcomes that you hope for in terms of like, whatever, good dental hygiene? No, it's actually 2 minutes a day, every day, that's going to give you the best results. And it's the same thing at the gym, it's the consistency and so on. So absolutely, read the books, go to therapy, figure a few things out. The trick is to figure out ways to integrate it and build healthy habits that become a part of your lifestyle. And it's not extraordinary things. It's small, tiny little things. It's in between meetings to roll your shoulders back and take a breath and bring in some self-compassion. It's some grounding practices. It's seeking support, asking for help. All the literature around resiliency factors have identified that essentially resilient people have a few things in common. One is they have the belief or the mindset that going through hard times is normal and expected, and they can get through it. The second resiliency factor is they ask for help. They seek support. They don't go at it alone. So, it's some of those pieces is about figuring out, it's kind of mindset change, but then it's figuring out those small little gestures that you do every day that contribute to, your mental health hygiene. And that applies for like organizational hygiene too. We want to create an environment in our work environments as well that can foster compassion, empathy, well-being. We're gone are the days, well, I hope, I think we should be gone with the days where we, imply that all self-care should be done on your personal time. Well, we know the drill, right, Sam? We've been through this in life where you give everything you've got to your job. And so even if there was some idea of self-care, going to the gym, mental health repairs, anything, if you're depleted, you never get to that part. And so again, it comes back to the importance of those small gestures and integrating it throughout the day. So we're not banking all of our self-care time for the part of the day or the part of life where we're already on empty,
Mm-hmm. And, I always think about, items that are important to me, like this one. I think you're too young to remember this commercial, but there was a commercial way back, I think it was in the 70s, where it was a special shampoo, and it was like, and I told to, and she told to, and I told to, and it was all like, it became this web across the screen. So I think I'm hoping today that people do feel, armed enough with some information to be able to at least have a conversation and say, like, have you heard about this? I saw this webinar, and you could watch this webinar, and, that kind of thing. I've been asking all the questions, but we have great questions.
Good. Okay.
From our participants. So I'm going to ask a couple of these questions, and we can go from there. So Jean's asking for your advice. He says, I left a nonprofit 20 years and recently made a comeback. My compassion drove me back. Mm-hmm. So, I think the question there, I don't want to speak for Jean. John, if you want to write more in the chat, I can certainly take it from there. But I think I'm sort of implying the question has to do with, how do I ensure it doesn't sort of happen again?
Yeah. And that's so, love that. First of all, it's just a good sign that when you step away, that compassion was always there, right? It was always there. It was the stress of trying to of being in that nonprofit environment, all of the things we wish to do, but, are limited in doing often, right? Fundraising, mandates, resources. That stress can really build up, and it's that interference. That's what that compassion fatigue is, right? It just becomes too much. We box up our heart, we pull away. So I think it's a great story. It's a great narrative there. Like that the compassion was always there. Coming back, I think it's important to, again, bring that harmony, keep that compassion alive. It's the antidote to the hopelessness that can creep up, that helplessness that can creep up, that propels us into the escape and numbing kind of place. So keep the compassion alive, doing practices, where sometimes it's gratitude practices, sometimes we call it glimmers, looking for glimmers. Glimmers are like those teeny tiny little micro moments that we all just glaze right over, but are just really beautiful human experiences. And so I have that practice every day. I look for glimmers, and when you start getting into that practice, you start scanning your day for it. This morning, I dropped my daughter off late for school, of course, with the first snowfall. We were all frazzled, and I'm like, trying to get there. I'm in my pajamas.
Yeah.
And then I dropped her off, and I was just about to like peel out, and then I just was like, whoa. And I looked up, and I cracked the window, and I heard the kids playing in the yard, and that like joyous laughter. And it was just like, I was just like, program it, take it in. And I could have just carried on, right? But it's that micro moment where you take it in. It feeds our heart. It feeds our purpose. And then, sure, there are stressors in the day, but you can kind of hang on to that. So it's really about brain change, like training our brain for those little to look for those little micro moments.
Yeah, beautiful.
There's other ways of managing the stress, of course. There are things like, again, like, setting boundaries and knowing your limits. Those would be things I would recommend as well in the nonprofit. I mean, there's always going to be more demand than what you can possibly offer. And so it's so tempting to just keep pushing that boundary. So just, the basics: take your breaks, take your lunch, hydrate, say no to unrealistic expectations and go home at night and enjoy the part of life that and embrace that, because sometimes that comparative suffering comes up there too, where people will not enjoy their evenings because in comparison to the people they interact with in the day or the things that they hear about in the day, it's like they almost feel guilty for like relaxing.
So can I tell you something? About a week after I started working at the mission, so I started working December 5th. So it would have been like, midway through December, kind of this time of year. I came home and I started to turn a hot bath on. And then I was getting ready to have my bath. And then I looked at the bath and I burst out into tears. So a week after starting the mission. And I was like, there's people that will never have a bath like this. We'll never be able to. And you just go to the extreme too, right? Like, and so, yeah, I totally feel that. We've got a couple of questions. I want to make sure we get to all of them. Someone's telling you wonderful presentation already. The question is, until which degree should you ask for help? Is this kind of an individual thing, Amanda?
Yeah, I totally think it's individual. The one thing I've learned is that everybody's continuum is completely different. So I love doing this exercise with large groups, and the realization afterwards is people will realize that one person's red zone warning sign is another person's yellow zone warning sign. So you really got to kind of map out the continuum first, and then obviously earlier interventions are better. Sometimes asking for help, well, that depends how many people get it and would be responsive to that. The more, I think in reality, just asking for help with if you are surrounded with, really kind of supportive people who wouldn't judge about that, then that might be easier. So whereas other people may have the urge to ask for help or may have a lot of more personal barriers around asking for help because of environments that we work in, the cultures that build up, in nonprofits, there's a lot of like this is what it is, this is what you signed up for kind of. So sometimes that stops us from being vulnerable and opening up, So yeah, I really do think it's quite different, but I will say that again, as I mentioned, you might kind of notice some of those warning signs if they last more than a few days, if you kind of having a hard time sort of bouncing back, or especially even if you start doing things like kind of self-care like things or things that are good for your mental health or your well-being, and that feeling of emotional numbness and absence and apathy continue, then that's a signal that it's kind of creeping into basically like functional impairment, so there's sort of the stress, and then there's the stress buildup, and then it's getting in the way now of me and my relationships. For me, my wake-up calls were when it was no longer this internal experience that I was kind of aware of, but I could kind of still kind of hide it from everybody else. For most of us, we're going to show the true signs of compassion fatigue with our loved ones, and where we feel most safe and vulnerable. And so when, unfortunately, the truth is that, like, my big wake up call was when my husband's grandfather passed away at 101 years old.
Wow.
Peacefully in his sleep. And of course, my husband is grieving. And I felt nothing. I was like, why are you crying over that? It was 101. And I didn't say that out loud. Okay. But it was really like, oh my gosh, where are my emotions? Where is my empathy? And it was like this wake up call that something was really changing in me. And that wasn't just a mood. It wasn't just a hard day. I'm tapped out emotionally. It was, this has been going on for so long now that it's a pattern. And so, and then of course, like other things, like it can change your behaviors, like you get irritated. And, I yelled at someone one time, a friend of mine who, this was mission days. She went to the radio center, and, she had put a pair of boots on reserve and they had given them away. And she was so upset. And I got so mad at her. I yelled, and I don't yell at anybody. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, like I couldn't feel for her. I had nothing. And so I guess that it's a long way of saying it. It's different for everybody. I say at any point in the continuum, talk about it, ask for help, share stories, hear what people have got coming back. Yeah. But that's where we're really looking for is intensity and frequency of experiences are increasing. And you kind of usually, we all have a moment where it, like a kind of the wake up call happens at different times for people.
Yeah. Brilliant. And thanks for your vulnerability, by the way, for sharing that.
Oh, thanks.
Appreciate it. And thanks, Natushka. That was Natushka's question. She's always got great questions. This is a very vulnerable post from an anonymous attendee. And I just want to say thank you so much, because I think I read this and I'm like, there are probably a lot of people on the call that are going to relate to this. So it says, hello, I was wondering how you'd recommend dealing with compassion fatigue in the climate sector. Most days I cry about climate change and the loss we'll all experience, but I also feel like I'm not doing enough, which makes me really sad. Is this normal? What would you recommend?
Let's just sit with it for a second, because I really do think that there's a lot of folks that can relate to that. It's so vulnerable. It's so real. And there is no answer, magical answer to that. I think that the most important thing that you could do that can shift things is pick up on that thought that was expressed in that writing, that no matter what I do, it doesn't feel like it's enough. And we say that thought in all sorts of different areas of our life, and it turns into this weaved in perspective of ourselves that I'm not good enough. And that changes everything. Then even when you are doing compassionate things, helpful things, doing your job, I mean, you're dooming yourself to just feel like it's not worth anything. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is just doing some work around connecting with our worthiness of as a human being on this planet. You are born with worth. You are worthy. Your worth is not dependent on your achievements, on your helpfulness, on your impact. These are all wonderful things to strive for in terms of, our purpose and our mission, the change work, our impact. But you are one tiny little human being in a really big universe. And so if you, bring perspective to it, your tiny little impact is matched with who you are, So I really pull back on, actually, I'll share my mantra back in mission days when I was, in my recovering from burnout phase. I realized that every day the internal dialogue was, I'm not good enough. I didn't do enough. I don't have enough. I didn't get enough sleep. I don't have enough time. And I was like, wow, I'm really setting myself up. Like from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, this is the language and so I said, well, I whether I feel that way or not all the time, I'm going to flip the narrative. And so every day, multiple times a day, I said this mantra: I am enough. I do enough. I have enough. I am enough. I do enough. I have enough. And so then if the reality was, geez, this problem with climate change is still ongoing, and it's so intense, and that thought of, will I really make a difference here? Then I would just stop that thought. I'd put the stop sign up in my mind, and then I'd say, wait a minute, I am enough, I do enough, I have enough. Right. And then I keep going with whatever my mission was. So I think we need to scale it back and appreciate our impact. as little as it may seem, our empathy and our compassion have impact. We don't always see the outcomes of that. I think in 20 years of doing human service work, I have learned many, many times that people have come back to me years later and said, that tiny little thing that I did, or they'll say something that I don't even remember. They'll say, you were the only one who smiled at me that day. I mean, I've had people say, I was thinking of killing myself, and you gave me boots, and I didn't. And I don't remember that, but man, they do. And I had enough experience like that to realize that you don't have to see your impact. You have to believe in your impact.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
I cannot believe it is 5 to 5. I am in denial. That felt like 5 minutes. As you know, I could talk to you forever. We have one more question. So we have maybe about 3 minutes, but I really want to get to this one because it's such a good question. Once again, an anonymous attendee sharing today. What would you do when you have limited resources to seek health and support, but the people you would normally go to also seem to be experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a question, but it's a scenario, right? It's a scenario that I think many of us are in. Literally, resources are limited. People, resources, time, energy. It's very real. There is a lot of things. I think that I really try to tailor the free resource page on my website for people who are in that space, who want to do some self-help, right? So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do on our own. As we create change in ourselves, that has ripple effects out on people. We get more courageous in telling our stories and our experiences. People come in, we find our allies there. You find the people who are willing to show up as vulnerable as you are and say, me too. And we're in this together, and we're not going to judge each other. And so it really starts with, doing a little bit of that work yourself. It's a very, very vulnerable and brave place to begin. And you test the waters, and you will find your allies, and they might be right there with you, but it's the glimmer of hope, and it's the glimmer of wanting change and saying, we don't deserve to feel like this forever. And there are things that we can do to change our circumstances. And even if nothing else changes, the climate's still the way it is, and the world is still the way it is, and your work environment still is high demand, and your family and your kids still need to be taken care of. Even if everything stays exactly the same, we can create change in our inner world through self-awareness, through self-compassion, through honoring our needs and desires, taking responsibility for them, and really living our lives in respect of our humanity. The thing that makes us so awesome and compassionate, but also recognizing our limitations. I will say that I was being interviewed a long time ago by somebody doing a podcast, and they said, what was the turning point for you? And I said, I think I woke up one day and I realized I'm not a superhero. I don't have superpowers. I am a human. And as soon as I started to appreciate myself just as a human being, I started to show up with that. And I started finding the other human beings who were like, yeah, I'm done being a superhero too. Can we just be humans right now? And eventually there's a ripple effect that happens in relationships with people. But I think it begins with our self-awareness, our self-compassion, and our vulnerability.
Beautifully said. I shared in the chat, I am enough, I do enough, I have enough. And also someone has shared The Flight of the Hummingbird. Are you familiar with that, Amanda?
I'm not.
Okay, so they've shared that in the link in the chat as well with a link. So that might be something they're reading to that from your chat today. Listen, we've had people join us right across the country, but it still feels like we were all just at home, feeling very vulnerable. Many of us today sharing. And so thank you for your vulnerability as well today. And I'm hoping today that just one person, Amanda, just one person says to someone else, do you have this thing called compassion fatigue? I saw Sam and Amanda talking about this. That's all I hope. That's all I hope.
Yeah. And this resource will be there on the website, and people can keep coming back to it.
Wonderful.
And it just starts there, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, busy mom, busy wife, busy everything. Taking the time today to speak to us at CBI. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. We are getting ready for 2024 already, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sam Laprade. We're coming back in 2024. There's going to be some new times, some new dates. So you'll want to check that out. Nick alluded to it a little bit earlier. January 24th is when we'll see you next time, which feels like a very long time. We enjoy seeing you here every single month. Thank you so much for doing everything you do for this sector. It is a lot of work. And as we talked about today, be gentle on yourself. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.